What's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And, I feel like by this point, a lot of people have come aboard the idea that the next Xbox will be a PC hybrid console. The evidence just keeps piling up, and with that, there really is a very real chance that it will come included with the most popular PC storefront being Steam. Yeah, this could be a very enticing machine. However, there is one question that seems to be growing in popularity. Could PlayStation stifle this vision, or at least somewhat? And we will get into that today. Now, there's also a Nintendo rumor going around that really took me by surprise, and I imagine a lot of other people as well. So make sure to stay tuned for that and whether or not there is any authenticity to this. But first, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and also on YouTube memberships. Thank you all just so much for what you do. I genuinely do appreciate each and every one of you. Let's go get right into things, though, starting off with Assassin's Creed Shadows. Obviously, this has been a very controversial release, and there is a major focus on whether or not it can find success. Well, we got some vague answers for that this morning, and I do want people to kind of keep that part in mind because this reminds me a lot of the Dragon Age Velgard situation. Hold tight, I'll explain. But Ubisoft officially unveiled that Shadows has already eclipsed 2 million players. Now keep in mind, that's not sold, because they do have Ubisoft Plus subscribers as well, but there was also a source that confirmed to Variety that it's the second best day one sales revenue for an Assassin's Creed title. So that last part is genuinely a good sign for its success, especially after last week when we saw its lukewarm Steam numbers. That was a little bit concerning, but seemingly, Shadows is doing much, much better over on consoles, and at the very least, it seems to be on the right track. However, with all that said, I still think people on all sides, whether you're against Shadows or for it, everybody needs to kind of calm down and just wait for Ubisoft to confirm if it has met their expectations. And we likely won't get that information until a future financial report. I mean, I said the exact same thing about Dragon Age the Velgard. Not because I was for it or against it. It was really just kind of the reality of the situation. But because a lot of people were and are with this game as well, emotionally invested in its success or failure, people let their emotions speak for them. They celebrated early and they got mad at me for, cautioning people a little bit, but ultimately, I was correct. Immediately, people started to celebrate the early milestones that were posted online, and then like a month or two later, those same people discovered that it actually flopped. And the reason for that is because modern AAA games are very expensive to make. I've said this time and time again, it is unsustainable. It's not uncommon anymore for AAA games to have to sell millions upon millions upon millions of copies just for razor-thin profits. So what I can say here is that this appears to be a great start for Assassin's Creed Shadows, but without knowing Ubisoft's internal expectations, I would still caution people from jumping to an early conclusion, just given how emotionally invested people are into this specific topic. If people weren't so emotionally invested in its success or failure, I probably wouldn't have to word it this way. But nonetheless, we'll see how this plays out in the long run. But for the time being, this does seem to be a really good start for Ubisoft, so congrats to them. Now, since we're on the topic of controversial, we might as well just go ahead and talk about Silent Hill F. I'm actually very optimistic about this game, or at least based on the very little that they've actually shown so far. I'm hoping we see some gameplay sometime soon, but I have noticed a lot of skepticism among Silent Hill fans. There are some significant deviations from the previous Silent Hill games, including the way Konami is describing its gore. Allegedly, it will be the goriest Silent Hill game ever made. And a recent Australian rating seemed to have leaned into that idea. That's because the Australian rating board initially banned Silent Hill F, or so it seemed. They originally gave it an RC rating, which stands for Refused Classification, which, further begs the question of just how gory this game actually is and just what kind of horrific content does it include. Now, the Australian rating board didn't give much of a reason for their decision. But if you previously saw that rating online, if you saw it on social media or just somewhere else, well, what I can say here is that they have since deleted that rating. They responded to the controversy by stating Silent Hill F is not currently classified as refused classification in Australia. The March 14, 2025 entry on the National Classification Database has been removed. A classification decision will be published to the National Classification Database ahead of the game's release. So they either backtracked on their decision because of the online controversy, or I'd say the more likely case here is that it was just simply published as an error. Do me a favor, though. I want to hear from you Silent Hill fans out there. Are you skeptical of some of the changes for Silent Hill as I've kind of seen online, or are you optimistic like I am? Oh, and we also got the release date for Indiana Jones on the PlayStation 5. We all knew that this was going to happen eventually, and now it's officially slated for an April 17th release. Now, you can either get the standard version for $70 or a premium version for $100, which will actually give you 2 days of early access, meaning that you can play as early as April 15th. Now, that's not something that I would personally do myself. Everybody can do what they want with their own money, but this has clearly been a growing trend among high-profile Xbox-owned games, which indicates that this, has been a winning strategy for them. I guess it's just easy money for them by this point. Now, if you're a physical collector, though, you're also in luck, or at least kind of sort of. There is a physical release, including a collector's edition, which will run you $190. Yeah, that's going to be quite expensive, especially when you realize that, well, it does seem like you won't have the actual game on disc. You will have to download it separately. So, I mean, it is what it is by this point. But either way, if you have just been craving the Indiana Jones experience on your PlayStation 5, well, the wait is almost over. All right, so let's go talk about Xbox, though, and exactly what's happening with their next generation platform. The idea that it's going to be a console PC hybrid that can also utilize Steam games seems to have become more and more realistic by the day. But however, this has raised a major question among a lot of fans out there, and that's for PlayStation. Does this mean that PlayStation games will technically be playable on the next Xbox through Steam? Or will Sony instead somehow find a way to block that from happening? Now, I don't believe they can actually do that, which I'll explain here in just a moment, but this question was a big talking point over the weekend. I saw several conversations about this exact topic, including from Jez and from Tom Warren. You can even take a look at this poll from Jez, which asked, if the next Xbox supports Steam Epic Game Store, will PlayStation block their PC titles on Microsoft's hardware? And you can see 61% actually voted yes, that Sony will indeed block their games on Xbox hardware. So, I mean, you can see there's definitely a lot of skepticism right now, which I don't really agree with in this situation, or at least currently based on everything that we know. Jez seems to believe that Sony can block Xbox's future hardware, but my reason against that idea is that technically, it's not going to be an Xbox console by the very definition. Instead, it's going to be a Windows PC, but with an Xbox front end. So I'll just kind of use the Steam Deck as an example. The way the Steam Deck works is that it boots into SteamOS, which is nothing more than a front end to Linux to make it feel like a console experience. But you can exit the SteamOS at any point in time and then enter into Linux's desktop mode. It's still a Linux-based PC, which is why it's described as a PC gaming handheld and not just a handheld console. So, in theory, if the next Xbox works the same way, but with, Windows instead, then it should be able to exit the Xbox OS and go into Windows Desktop. So with that in mind, I don't really see how PlayStation could block their games from running on desktop mode. Yes, they're not going to be selling their games directly on the Xbox store itself, but that was never really the theory in the first place. The theory here is that you can go into Windows mode, and then you can play Steam games, including PlayStation games, that are on the Steam platform. So, I mean, unless Sony just stops supporting Windows entirely, which I find highly unlikely, then I don't really see how they can somehow block the next Xbox, considering, again, it's also technically going to be a Windows PC. In my opinion, the only thing that Sony could actually do here is to just not release any more of their games on the PC, which again, I also think is highly unlikely given the success that they've had on the platform. So I don't really agree with Jez in this case, but let me know what you all think about all this. With just how big of a conversation this has become, do you think he's right and that Sony actually has the ability to block Xbox's next machine if it's Windows-based or not? All right, now one more thing before we go, and this does come as really a bit of a surprise, but there is a rumor going around right now that Nintendo will hold a Switch 1 Direct sometime this week, maybe possibly on Wednesday. Now, this seemingly started from a Chinese forum poster who previously leaked the entirety of the June 2024 Direct. To make things even more mystifying, though, is that several other insiders, including Andy Robinson from the Video Game Chronicles and Stealth, have thrown out some vague remarks that this could actually be a thing. I mean, we got the all-knowing winking emojis and everything, and yes, that's where a lot of this rumor is based off of. So personally, I think people should take this with a huge grain of salt. But admittedly, even though the timing of this might seem a little bit bizarre, with the Switch 2 Direct plan for next week, I think there is a reason to believe that this could actually happen, or at least in theory. Now, I'm not saying that it will. I'm not predicting anything here, but I can also point to the fact that we have next to zero information about really any Switch game going forward. Nintendo just released Xenoblade X, but I mean, after that, we really don't have any official information for future Switch 1 games, and I highly doubt that that is the last Switch 1 game. I fully expect the Switch 1 to be supported for the foreseeable future, and we've been hearing about games like Kirby Robobot and Metroid Prime 2 and 3 as 3 examples. So I fully expect the Switch 1 to be supported for the foreseeable future, whether that be with cross-generational games or games that were just fully developed with the Switch 1 in mind. So I do think there's a few announcements that they have in the pipeline for the Switch 1. And if you think about it this way, with the Switch 2 Direct next week, they might not want to talk about Switch 1 games for that much longer because they want the main focus to be on the Switch 2. So what I'll kind of say here is that I don't think that this rumor is just completely crazy. It's more of one of those wait and see type of things, but just kind of keep in mind here that even if Nintendo has some reveals planned for this week, it could be in the form of a smaller Direct or one of those Twitter-like Directs that they do every once in a while. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a big general Direct with just tons of announcements. So just kind of keep that in mind. If true, though, we're not going to have to wait all that long to find out for ourselves. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.